It's also a small museum. We have recreated Ray Bradbury's space as an office with entirely original artifacts. And we do offer tours to the public on occasion. So please follow us on social media if you'd ever like to come and see the collection. On behalf of the Bradbury Center and the School of Liberal Arts, I want to welcome you to our Literary Festival, Festival 451 Indie. We have events throughout the month of September to celebrate our literary heroes. Two of mine are going to be taking the stage in just a moment. To encourage people, the festival encourages people to cultivate an active reading life and to celebrate the humanities. Our festival references Ray Bradbury's most famous work, Fahrenheit 451, a cautionary tale about the consequences of the cultural devaluation of literacy. His words, "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture, just get people to stop reading," have only become more poignant and relevant today. That's why we felt that a festival like Festival 451 Indie was necessary. So thank you so much for being here tonight and being part of it. Hopefully you picked up some note cards. As you're listening to the speakers tonight, please write down your questions. And I think these two aisles here, if I'm wrong, somebody will correct me. Okay, I got a thumbs up from the boss. So these two aisles here, you'll be able to approach a microphone and address your questions. So please stick around for the Q&A. Sometimes that's the best part. Although I think everything about tonight's going to be great. We also want to thank the A.W. Clues Foundation for sponsoring tonight's event and for sponsoring the entire festival that lasts the entire month of September. Their generosity made this festival possible. In your programs tonight, there's a short survey. If you could fill that out and turn it into one of our team members at our information table in the lobby, that would be super helpful for us. We do have to do a grant report for Clues. And your response to the event tonight would go a long way in helping us craft that report. We definitely appreciate it. Before introducing our speakers, I want to share a brief land acknowledgement. IUPUI acknowledges our location on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Miami, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. We honor the heritage of Native peoples, what they teach us about the stewardship of the earth, and their continuing efforts today to protect the planet. Founded in 1969, IUPUI stands on the historic homelands of Native peoples, and more recently, that of a vibrant Black community, also unjustly displaced. Where we sit tonight, Madam Walker Theater is one of the last vestiges of that vibrant community. As the present stewards of the land, we honor them all as we live, work, and study at IUPUI. Today, people in this state who teach about the injustices of the past are under attack. And I want to affirm tonight that we stand with our public educators, our public libraries, and librarians. We honor their expertise. We will never correct the injustices of the present if we fail to acknowledge our past, especially the parts that make us uncomfortable. If there are educators and librarians in our audience tonight, would you please raise your hand so we can honor you? Thank you. Thank you for what you do. Tonight, in part, we honor Ray Bradbury, a great author who spent his life standing up for public libraries because knowledge should be free and accessible to everyone, no matter what. We stand against any attempt to whitewash our history. The old adage that those who refuse to learn history are doomed to repeat it rings true. But I would add, it seems clear that those who actively try to prevent history from being taught intend to repeat it. We will not let that happen. So tonight, the Ray Bradbury Center is thrilled to partner with our friends at the Center for Africana Studies and Culture in presenting a night with two legendary authors, Dr. Charles Johnson and Stephen Barnes. Tonight's event will be moderated by my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Les Etienne. Executive Director of the Center for Africana Studies and Culture. Dr. Les, the stage is yours, my friend.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Little housekeeping before we get started, because we are really rarefied air here tonight. So I want to acknowledge in right in the front here to also legendary writers, Ms. Sharon Skeeter and also Ms. Tanya Redu right here in the front. And big thanks to Jason and the staff and folks at the Bradbury Center for putting this on and also giving us an opportunity to play a role in it. Some colleagues from liberal arts are sitting right there. Shout out to y'all. Hello. And also our dean, Robert Ryder, our colleague, but our dean is also in the house here tonight as well, Tammy Idle. So I'd like to bring up Mr. Barnes and Dr. Johnson, if they can hear me, to come on up, and we'll get started. Welcome. Thank you both for being here. Greatly appreciate it. I think it's always good to introduce folks to who we have, this august panel that we're in here tonight. So if you wouldn't mind, we just get started and jump right in. But also, I think there might be people in the house that would want to know about who we are sitting with tonight.
No, I'm always curious about who I'm sitting with. Sitting alone in the room.
Exactly. There you go. Exactly. You know what I forgot to say?
What did you forget to say?
We had Mr. Morris Roberts in the house tonight as well. Yes, that's right. Yes. So, if you don't mind, I will start with the youngest of us. Yes. Because it's very important for us to understand the value in the work you've done in the literary world, but also in academia and some of these other places. If you don't mind, just giving a brief bio, a little bit about yourself.
Okay. You got 30 minutes? First I want to say, this is a joyful occasion for me to be on the stage with this gentleman, but especially that gentleman on the end. We have collaborated on a number of projects in the past, most recently the Eightfold Path, which is award-winning, as it turns out, graphic novel. All of it, all credit goes to Steve. They're all of his stories. Okay. I came on, and I took the ride with him, and it was like anything we do together, a great pleasure. We have a lot of overlap. I did a book in 1988 called Being and Race, Black Writing Since 1970. And in the last chapter, it's a survey of Black writers up to 1970. In the last chapter, I mentioned this guy I keep running across. He's a martial artist, and he writes science fiction, and he's a black dude too. I think, that's me. That's me. But then I realized, no, it's this character over here, Stephen Barnes, who has been my hero for a very long time. My history, my journey into creativity, it was truly influenced by the man who did this book. It was in our writer, Ray Bradbury. But I come to this from being a journalist and a cartoonist. That was my first love, my first passion was drawing. In high school, I became a professional illustrator when I was 17. I did some illustrations for a Magic Company catalog in Chicago. And seen that down, by the way, too, that I got paid, it was free. And it was actually, I was gonna use it because I was so broke at grad school. But I started out as a cartoonist and a journalist, and along the way, read, voraciously, of course. Cartoons, we read a lot, so we can get ideas from all kinds of different sources. And as around the time I was 18, I got exposed to philosophy, and decided one of these days I have to get a doctorate in philosophy. I just have to. One of the delights I discovered is how much Bradbury admired Socrates and Marcus Aurelius, the Stoics, right? So my journey took me from drawing to scholarship, and then to writing at a certain point, novels, short stories, essays, and other things. One of the things I would emphasize, which I'm sure most of you know already, but I have to remind myself of it repeatedly, is all of the liberal arts and the humanities are interconnected. One thing will lead you to another thing. If you may want to get up one day and draw, but then the next day you might want to get up and start a short story. And the third day, you might want to get up and write an essay on a question that's been troubling you about the mind-body relationship. There is no reason why any of us should have to allow anybody to put us in a little box and say, this is all that you do. If you see my name crop up in something like Charles Johnson novels, that's something that we're going to do. So all of these arts feed each other, creatively. And when I was young, looking at Bradbury's movies, reading short stories, I felt that spirit, of openness and the excitement that just comes from doing something, not, as Bradbury said, for money or fame. First, it's for the love of doing it. You get money and fame later if you get it. Well, that's fine, but that's not your motivation. Your motivation is the fact that when you create, you're creating yourself. With every canvas, with every novel, with every story, with every poem, you're realizing your own individual inherent potential as a human being who can, through craft, give a gift to the world of beauty, goodness, and truth, goodness, and beauty that may enrich the lives of others. That's why I think we create and why we honor this guy. No shame.
I was relatively poor kid, grew up in a broken home in South Central Los Angeles, and I knew that the world that was presented to me was not the real world. I knew that there were some things that were said to me about who I was and what my potential was and what my people were that was not accurate. So as many people did, I think a large number of people in the science fiction, fantasy, fanish community are people who grew up feeling like the world inside them that they connected with was not the same as the world that they saw. And they looked to the stars, they looked to the past, they looked to other worlds and other points to get a sense of, in some ways, what might be truer. That science fiction is a fiction of ideas and concepts. What if only, if this goes on, often anchored to physics, but sometimes about the human heart, but usually if there are two questions that are central to philosophy, those questions are probably who am I and what is true? What is it to be human and what is the world that human beings perceive? And science fiction approaches it in one way. Fantasy approaches it in another. Fantasy is not about the world of physics. It's about the world of symbols and the human heart and the way these things interact. It's about the poetry, what's happening kind of between the atoms, kind of between the events. So whereas science fiction has to be both internally and externally consistent, connected to physics, as I said, fantasy has to only be internally consistent, that within this we are talking about human heart, human perception, and what are we and how do we feel this? Bradbury drew my attention. I was reading voraciously at that time. I was looking for that question, who am I and what is true? So I slept in a bedroom with the walls lined with books. And Ray Bradbury was interesting because he was published in science fiction magazines, but he was not writing about what if in that way. He wasn't interested in the physics of the situation. He was interested in the poetics of it as if he were a fantasy writer. He was about where is the human heart in all of this. So the Martian Chronicles it was not what Voyager landed on or whatever it was that were our first rovers. I forget what the name was. He was interested in Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars. He was interested in Barsoom. He was interested in the poetics of science. And because of that, he touched my heart. He was a poet writing science fiction stories, being published in science fiction magazines, but you weren't going to learn anything about science by reading Ray Bradbury. What you were going to learn about was, what is it to be human? What is it to see the stars? What is it to yearn for a meaning to our lives? What are we in the vastness of the universe? And that really touched this young kid trying to figure out who he was. The vision of the universe in that sense was so large that individual political or philosophical differences that deviled us on Earth are meaningless once you start backing up. When astronauts talk about how when they were in orbit, they looked down at the world and there were no divisions of nations, and they had a spiritual experience. They said the first day everybody was pointing out the city they came from. The next day, when they were talking about the International Space Station, they were talking about what nations they came from. The next day after that, they were talking about the continent. And then by the fourth day, they're just looking at the world. And those individual differences dissolve. When you look at the world in terms of a sound of thunder going back 100 million years or forward into the future, the problems that we have right now politically or in terms of nations and the joining together of just different groups of people being separated by large amounts of geography, all that stuff disappears. The question of what is the difference between this civilization and that civilization, it might be 1,000 years of development, but 1,000 years of development is nothing in terms of the 13.7 billion years that this universe has existed. It's nothing at all. Those differences dissolve. And that was the world that I wanted to live in, a world in which those differences that were necessary because the human mind works in terms of what is similar as opposed to what is different. That dualism created a lot of our science and so forth and so on. But ultimately getting caught in the middle of that, you are not this because of that. You are this because of this. If you feel caught in that, then taking that larger perspective can feel like taking a breath of fresh air for the first time. Of stepping outside anything anyone ever said about who you were, what your potential was, and being lost in the poetry of experience. So my connection to Bradbury was that I saw the poetry in the mundane, the unusual in the daily. And he went there. Every time he went there. From his earliest stories, which were often what are called bite or bit stories, where somebody does a bad thing and they are destroyed by the consequences of their action. In these old, pulp magazines, in stories of ghastlies and murders and ghosts and goblins, I just ate that up because I would read him and I would read other people on the same thing. But Bradbury was always about something more than the events and the actions. There we go. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, who I am, growing up in the shadow of giants, one of whom was the man that we come here to honor today, is a kid who grew up in South Central Los Angeles, wanted to be a science fiction writer, found a great mentor in Larry Niven, who was one of the great science fiction writers of the 20th century, took me under his wing, showed me how to do it, gave me opportunities. I was able to build a life. I published over 3 million words, and the New York Times bestseller list, and this award and that. That's all fine. But the important thing is I got to spend my life doing the thing I dreamed of as a kid. That was the reward. Just to be able to do that, to be able to every day talk to the little kid inside me and say, I've kept the faith, and maybe look at me and say, Dad, you sure did. That is worth, there is nothing I would exchange that for. And Ray Bradbury was one of the shining lights that said it's possible to get all the way there and never sell yourself out.
Yeah. Can I add something to that?
Of course.
One of the things Bradbury gives us, and gave me as a young person, here that you say Bradbury gave it to you too, a sense of mystery and wonder about this existence in which we find ourselves. The whole thing, the view from the sciences, right? From the solar system, moving all the way out to galaxy, as our problems seem so infinitesimally small and trivial, and race so small and trivial when we take that perspective. So science fiction is an intellectual discipline, allows us to dream. You know, one of my colleagues, the late Joanne Russ, once pointed out that
Female man, Joanne Russ?
yeah,
Oh,
she
cool.
was my colleague at UW, University of Washington. She once wrote that a woman wrote to her about why she loved science fiction. She lived in a kind of ordinary town, you know, very, very boring and conformist. But science fiction, what she really found appealing were the landscapes. The landscapes so different from the ones that she was living in, right? It opened up the imagination. Science fiction has always served that purpose, I think.
Well, you know, Ray Bradbury, if I may add to what you're saying, is that he might quibble with something that you said. It isn't about developing your ability to dream, it's about remembering it. We all go quietly insane every night. But we forget that, and that creativity, to a certain degree, is simply opening up a pore between our unconscious minds that dream every night and the conscious mind that performs. It does, the performative part of our mind, the part of us that says, I am. And the child has that, and life keeps telling the child, be practical, stay here, and we'll start shutting that down. Ray Bradbury never lost that thing. He never lost that connection with the child, and there are people who will say that all there is in genius is maintaining the creativity with a child with the discipline and knowledge of an adult. That if you can do that, if you can maintain a connection there, you are going to be performing at the highest level that you are capable of performing. It isn't gaining something that you don't have. It's remembering how you started. It's remembering the creativity and the aliveness and the sense of wonder, and that sense of engagement that every child has, that get squeezed out of us by the adult world.
I know. And that's what we want to keep alive.
Yes.
That child. Bradbury also put a lot of emphasis on the importance of the subconscious too. So I'm glad you pointed that out. You know, we always have to, I think, how do we get back to that innocence, that openness that we have as children before the world beat it out of us, or before critics, you know, beat it out of us. And so that's one of the reasons that Sharon Stephen and I are both practicing Buddhists. My practice, at least, gets rid of an awful lot of that conditioning from childhood on, from parents, teachers, so that I can experience the world with that sense of newness and wonder and mystery.
You do have that. I've commented to people that one of the things I love about you is how easily you are astonishing. That it's like you're constantly you're constantly discovering, oh, the world is here. Look at this. You know, you still have that. You're not numb. It hasn't been scabbed over. Your nerves are alive. You're strong enough that you're not afraid to feel. Okay? And I think that when we lose courage, you know, fatigue makes cowards of us all. Often as we age, or as we get tired, or as we shape our egos to fit into the different molds that people want us to shape it to, we start forgetting who we are, and that we started this life to enjoy it. That we want that sense of joy. And instead of that, we settle for not being afraid, at best.
Yeah, we can't lose that.
You can't.
Yeah, a human being cannot lose that and still be fully alive. One of the things I would like to think is my capacity. One of the things, at least in my work, as a philosophical matter, is I think that literature should liberate our perceptions. Liberate our perceptions. You say astonishment? I would like to be able to look at something as if I've never seen it before. It's often been said from very creative people, they look at something strange as if it's familiar, and the familiar as if it's strange, right? So we're constantly working with consciousness and our perception. And listen here, every moment that we're alive is new. Every single moment is alive. The past, I read a lot of historical fictions and so forth, but the past is past. And the future, I'm not going to worry about it, because it ain't come and it never will, because that's a horizon, a future that we can never reach. The only moment we have, right here, with each other, is right here, right now. Before I came over here, I sat for a little bit of meditation. I always do that. I would not meet a group or a crowd or do anything in public until I had that chance to sit, if only for 10 or 15 minutes, so that I can be here, right here, with all of you, right now, in the only moment that exists in time. Not worrying about what am I going to do when we're done with this, or what was the flight like getting us here with no sleep, from Seattle, right here, right now, new. Never had this moment before. You get up in the morning, wash your face, you got soap, okay, that's never happened before. You might think I'm doing a routine thing. No, not that soap, not that water, not that moment.
And not that version of you.
And not that version of me, you're right.
Can't step in the same piece of water twice because your foot is never the same and the water has changed.
That's right.
So it's that awareness that the sacred is in the mundane. That it is in this moment, that what I try to do is to center myself and then ask myself, what is the task to do next? The task may be to get out of bed and have breakfast. It may be to embrace my wife. It may be to counsel my son. It may be to play with the cat. It might be to answer an email. It might be to write a story. But all those, I'm not different people when I do those things. I'm the same person playing different roles. So let me be appropriate. The question is, can I be appropriate in this moment? Can I be here with this moment and the demands of this moment, with the story that I'm writing, or the person that I'm speaking to, or the task that I have to do?
Be here totally, right now.
Yes.
30% of yourself is trapped in the past, remembering, regretting. 30% is not projecting to the future, which you're going to do. You bring back all of yourself 100% to this moment right now. Whether it's writing, whether it's talking to your son, or you talking to the grandson, here, totally, right at this moment.
It's one of the reasons why the martial arts are such a great tool for learning that. Because 1 second of not thinking about right here, and you're getting hit in the head. So there's nothing like a smack upside the head and wake you up and go, no, I better be here now. I better forget about the hamburger I had yesterday, or my wife's gonna say when I get home, this guy's gonna knock my head off. Right here, right now, in this instant.
There is no other moment in time.
There is no other moment.
That's it.
And that sense of being there is consistent across all parts. And so this conversation concerning getting hit in the head.
In the zone.
Yes.
In the zone, right?
Yes.
And so go on.
Well, no, it's the dissolution of the subject-object relationship. There is not a you and it. There's something that is happening here, and you're not observing yourself doing it, because when you're observing yourself, some of the energy that you would have put into that moment is put into creating a self to observe. And what's even worse is when people observe themselves observing themselves. Now we're 2 steps removed from the process. And you've lost all the energy you need to liberate your true self. So in one sense, society will try to keep you in the place of observing yourself and judging yourself, because that way you become dependent upon society to say that you're okay. Right. Because if you're in the moment, you know you're okay. You're always okay when you're in the moment. Yeah. You're not okay once you observe yourself and start judging yourself. But when you're there and it's just happening, that's when you're totally alive. And that's what we look for in sexuality, in driving on the freeway, in heavy traffic, in the rain, in fighting, in writing, in reading, is a sense of total engagement in the moment. The I is not observed. It is subsumed in the process of the interaction. That thing of the page opening up and the fall into the page can happen only once this component skills have been reduced to unconscious competence.
Right. As you can tell, we talk a lot together. And we have long conversations like this, but this gentleman here may have.
I was gonna say that this is the easiest job. I definitely, the interesting thing is, you know, the one, I think it was like the one time I got a chance to, I think Jason and I were on a Zoom with you, and a similar conversation happened, and we were like in the chat, hey, let's just stay here. Let's just listen and get some. So, and I also will be remiss if I didn't mention that I am affiliate. Dr. Rhonda Henry was ill and could not make it. She would have been the person here today, so I didn't want to lift her up and mention that as well. So, thank you, first of all. Thank you for that opening sound.
Thank you, everybody.
So I do have one more thing, and this is more specific. You certainly touched on, and you showed us these were.
These, I purchased some years ago the complete line of Planet stories from the late 30s to the early 50s. These are the original issues. And they have Bradbury's original stories in them, and a lot of other people too, who became famous. But this is where he began, you know, with Paul. And I want to have the actual feel of that on underneath my fingers. See, one of the beautiful things about Bradbury and the Paul brothers, to me, is they're prolific. They were not worried about, am I writing something that will last for the ages? No. Bradbury is getting $20 to $40 per story. He's making himself write 1,000 words a day, a story a week. He's got to sell 2 a month in order to pay his bills, okay? He is immersed in the moment. These precede comic books, okay, by a few years, and the comic book artists were the same people. You know, you were not looking back. You were immersed in the moment of creation. You had a deadline to meet, and you produced all this stuff not thinking that this would shape culture, that the characters that you're creating, from Edgar Rice Burroughs to the Marvel characters, that these would be installed in popular culture 50 years later, so that even my grandson knows these characters, right? I admire artists who work like that, who don't think that what they're doing is precious, but what they're doing is absolutely everything they can do at the present moment.
Yes.
And then you let it go, and you go on to the next one.
Yes.
And you go on to the next one. And you're blessed to be able to have the opportunity to do that.
And that certainly was going to be, you know, kind of the next question I wanted to throw out there, very open-ended, of course, but just the idea of, you know, Bradbury's influence. You've touched on it a little bit, but just maybe if there was any particular specific.
Oh, I absolutely can. You can go first, or you know, I can go there, or whatever is appropriate.
I want to hear your story about Bradbury.
Okay. Anybody want to hear my stories about Bradbury? Because he was very important in my life, and I did not write this out because I know for a fact that I'm going to get choked up. So get ready for that. And I wrote down some dates just so I could get as precise as I could, but this is not a formal, you know, scholarly thing. So if any of the dates are wrong, you know, apologies in advance. So I grew up and I had a dream of being a science fiction writer. It was a thing that I really loved to do because I didn't understand math well enough to be a scientist. So I did the other thing. I could write poetry about the science. And so I was a little kid growing up in South Central LA and had dreams of being a writer, and I was writing as much as possible. Everything around me told me that I could not do it. You know, my dad was a backup singer for Nat King Cole, and I was in the studio when they did the background vocals for Ramblin' Rose. And I was watching Dad. Every time it's on the radio, I hallucinate that I can hear my dad's baritone. And my dad's singing career ultimately floundered, and it led to a divorce. And so my mom was terrified that if I followed the arts, that I would have a similar failure. And she used to tear my stories up and burn them because she was so scared that I would go down that path. But I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And by the time I got to college, I had I knew my mom wanted me not to write, and so I tried to step away from writing. But I was tricking myself. I'd take all kind of other classes. I would take, drama and composition and English and speech and stuff like this, work at the radio station, things adjacent to writing, without writing. And then finally they had a contest, a writing contest on campus, where the winner would read a story to the alumni. And I won the contest, and I read the story to the alumni, and I watched them react to me. And I realized this is who I'm supposed to be. That I would rather fail as a writer than succeed in anything else. So I dropped out of college. My girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife, and I were living together. She was an artist and I was a writer, and I was taking jobs adjacent to Hollywood, trying to work my way in. I was also writing stories. And I was starting to send them out, and I was getting rejected. And I think that at some point I started getting like a fifth of a cent a word, getting paid in contributors' copies. But I think before my first sale, I wrote a story, a Halloween story, called Trick or Treat, about a guy who, when he was a kid, his candy is snatched by the kids in the neighborhood. They were bullies. And when he becomes an adult, he starts, the kids in the neighborhood, he's living in the same house, they're playing tricks on him, so he plays tricks back. And the next year, they play a nastier trick, and the after that, he plays a nastier trick on them. He goes back and forth, until one year he plays a trick, and the kids, he accidentally kills a kid, and he knows the next year they're going to kill him. And so this story is called Trick or Treat, and I found out that Ray Bradbury was doing an autographing at a bookstore, and so my girlfriend was an artist, and I created a Halloween card that contained the story and artwork, and we went to his son, and we gave it to him in an envelope that had my address on it. And about 6 weeks later, I got a letter back from Ray Bradbury saying he loved my story. And this was the first time a professional human being, a person who was doing the thing that I wanted to do, let alone somebody who I admired so much, had said, yeah, kid, maybe you got what it takes. It meant more than I could possibly say. It inspired me to keep going. So I kept going. I'm writing, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. I'm still not succeeding very much, but I was starting to make a little bit of progress. My mom, who had always been terrified, finally realized that there was no way I was going to give it up. And so she kind of got on the bandwagon. And she found a course that was being taught at UCLA Extension by Robert Kirsch, who was the literary editor of the LA Times in about 1980, let's say, 1975. And no, this is about 1980, and so I took a class from Robert Kirsch, and it was a strange class. It was a little blue-haired lady writing astrological poetry, and the guy writing this and I was writing these strange stories, and I wrote one very strange story called Is Your Glass Half Empty, about a compulsive gambler who hawks his pacemaker. And he looked at me, and he didn't know quite what to make of the story. He said, I've got a friend I'd like to show this story to. Would you mind if I did that? I said, sure, go right ahead. And about 6 weeks later, I got a letter from Ray Bradbury, who was Robert Kirsch's friend, writing telling me he didn't remember the earlier story. He just said, hey, kid, this is good. That you got something, go for it. Don't ever give up. Do that Ray Bradbury inspirational thing. I kind of said, I got 2 letters from it. This is cool. So let me keep going. I eventually met Larry Niven and began working with him and started getting my career going. And in about
when year did you publish your first story?
I published my first story probably about 1980, 1981. Somewhere in there, maybe 79 to 81, somewhere in there, and it was like a fifth of a cent a word, and then I finally, the first story that was published in a professional magazine was called Endurance Violent, about an athlete who accidentally discovers a meditation that triggers his ability to be more of an athlete, and he starts running and he can't stop. So now I think that was my very first publication. And I was working with Larry Niven, and I had the balls to walk up to Larry, at the Las Vegas Science Fiction thing, and I said, hello, Mr. Niven, my name is Stephen Barnes, and I'm a writer, and he looked at me and said, all right, tell me a story. I found out from the way I come on to him, I had about 10 seconds to prove I wasn't an asshole. Luckily, I just put that story, is your glass half empty, into the mail that morning, so I was able to stumble out, you know, and that led to us eventually working together. In my working, he gave me a chance to work on an earlier story that he hadn't been able to finish to his satisfaction, called The Locust, which was about a group of space colonists who go to a planet and their children begin to devolve to Australopithecines, and they don't know how to deal with it. And if the problem in the story, yeah, who would, right? I mean, if the problem in the story had been biology, or cryptozoology, or physics, or astrophysics, I would have been lost. But luckily, the problem in the story was the psychology. That Larry did not understand group psychology as well as I think he could have, such that he did not understand the impact that would have on that little colony if these things happen. He was underestimating the emotions involved. So that gave me an opening, a way that I could contribute something to the story, and it led to a Hugo nomination in my first real publication, you know, with Larry. So it was like, you know, wow, this was, you know, I'm on my way. So one of the things that I was asked to do in this process was there was something called the Planetary Society, in which I was asked to be a presenter, to be an announcer. So I introduced several luminaries that were there, astrophysicists, and they might have been an astronaut, so forth. And one of the people was Ray Bradbury. So Ray walked up on stage, and before he walked up on stage, I told my story about how he was responsible for me getting published by giving me inspiration at the time when I was getting rejection after rejection after rejection, starting to question myself. And he walked up on stage and gave me a big hug. It was just a great moment. Everybody was quiet. It was very nice. About 8 years after that, I was teaching a class at UCLA. And it was a symposium, and every week we had a different notable come. And one week it was Ray Bradbury. So I went to Ray's house. He came and talked at the symposium. He was one of the, I think, 7 notables that we had coming. And before the class, I took him to dinner in Westwood, and Larry Niven asked if he could keep me, but before Larry got there, for 20 years, I was the only black male science fiction writer in the world. So far as I can determine, Chip Delaney had left the field. He'd gone into academia and queer fiction because he couldn't make a living in science fiction. I survived largely because of my partnership, my mentorship with Larry Niven. Because I do collaboration with him, I'd make enough money to be able to keep food on the table and a roof over my head. But I was starting to wonder, was I losing myself? Had I sold myself out? Was I losing my art? And I remember I had dinner with Leo and Diane Dillon, who we were just talking about, in Greenwich Village, and they were the essence of art. And it was like they did art together, where one would start a line, the other one would finish it, and back. And I was sitting at that table talking to them about the career of an artist, thinking I'd get some tips from my wife, who was interested in being a professional artist. And I suddenly realized I didn't care about that. What I wanted to know was, had I sold myself out? Had I sold out my heart? And I sat there, and I just poured my eyes out. I just started crying. Because I was in the presence of real artists here. This was for real, and I felt like a fraud. I felt like a phony, and I poured my heart out to them, and I finally said, "Is it too late for me?" And they looked at each other, and Diane looked at her husband, and then she reached across the table and she took my hands, and she said, "Steve, if you could even ask that question, it's not too late." Well, that helped, but I was sitting at the table with Ray Bradbury, my childhood idol, who somehow I had choreographed an opportunity to be with him and break bread with him and speak with him. And it was pretty much the same question. It's like, I've been hiding behind Larry Niven and his partner Jerry Cornell. I'm writing these things, and I've gotten these awards, and made this money and so forth, but I feel like, I don't know, am I broken? You know, is it too late for me? Can I still touch that part of me that's sacred? And he asked me, what she said, have you published? And I said, oh yeah, I published all these stories, about 6 books and this, that, and he just started laughing. He just laughed, oh, you are going to have no problem at all. And hearing that the second time is what made the difference. I was able to see that I was just on this road. I did not see Ray again for many years. And then in maybe the end of 2011 or the beginning of 2012, I was asked if I would make a presentation at an acknowledgement dinner for Ray Bradbury, who was very ill. He could barely speak. He was in his wheelchair, and it was held at the University of Sheraton sometime late 2011 or early 2012. And I got up on the stage. It was so good to see him, and he was so diminished physically, but the child self was still so alive. And his eyes were still so alive. I told the story of how he had reached out to me when I was getting started, and he'd written these letters giving me hope, helping me believe that maybe it was possible for me to have the life that I wanted. How grateful I was for a chance to say thank you to this great man. After I finished, he held out his arms, gave me a hug, and I went home. 6 weeks later, I got a letter from him telling me, thanking me for the words I said, and how it had reminded him of his own path and his own joy, and his gratitude for the life that he had had, and the fact that he'd been able to touch others. And the last words in that letter were, some of your tears are my own. Ray Bradbury. And about 6 weeks after that, he passed away. And I just wanted to say, there is no greater gift in life than being able to take a look at the child you were and the dreams that they had, and realize that you were actually able to live that life, and that there was no possible way that you could have done it alone. And that being able to talk to other people along the path who say, you know, you're not remotely at their level. Not remotely, but they don't care. All they care about is, are you writing? Are you reading? Are you teaching? Where are you? What does the territory look like from where you are? And I just wanted to say that everybody in this room has walked a path that others wish they could walk, has answered questions that other people can't even formulate yet. And you never know what a kind word or a kind act is going to mean. His actions meant the difference between life and death for a part of my soul. And I could not be who I am were not the people who had been kind to me, who saw me and saw some potential within me, and reached out their hand and said, you're going to have no problem at all. And I thank you for the chance to come here and say publicly how much I owe those people in one specific man, one great man, Ray Bradbury, who changed and saved my life.
teacher. He also written about a teacher in high school who, positively gave reinforcement.
Mrs. Lane Artemis.
Yes, so those teachers are extremely important in our lives. And I've had a several, when I was a cartoonist, and then the novelist John Gardner, when I was trying to write novels, and he led me into the book world, which I knew nothing about. And then later, when I was in philosophy with my dissertation director, who became a dear friend, he's actually passing away right now. But those teachers are extraordinarily important. But there's something else you said I'd like to know, I want you to say a bit more about. You work with Niven.
Yes.
Collaboratively.
Yes.
And you're wondering, what's happening to me? And where am I? So is that the opening, that question, that led you to, and John Reed, to Afrocentrism? Is that how you found your way there?
Well, okay, Afrofuturism.
I'm sorry, Afrofuturism.
Well, all that happened is I worked with Larry Niven and his partner Jerry Cornell, and I learned the basics of my craft, and I already had the basics of my craft. I came to them with a certain amount of skills that were developed. Then they took me to be a professional. I remember, Jerry, I don't know how many writers in world history have ever had the experience of two world-class writers, best-selling writers, award-winning writers, sitting on opposite sides of the room, tearing apart their work at the same time. Because I was working on a book with the two of them. And Cornell was taking great pleasure in this. He's like, Barnes, we're ripping apart Barnes's precious prose. Barnes, was your mother scared by a gerund? I mean, he took such glee in ripping me a new one every single time. I would drive home from working with them crying, sobbing, because just taking this battering. It was like being asked to spar with the black belt class. You got your butt kicked every night, but you crawl off the mat. But if I can survive this, I'm going to be a fighter. So I knew if I could survive this, I would learn things that are taught in no school in the world. Now, one of the things is that Jerry wrote stories that Jerry wanted to read. Larry Niven wrote stories Larry Niven wanted to read. So in order to be like them, it wasn't writing like Larry Niven and Jerry Cornell. I had to write stories that Stephen Barnes wanted to read. What were those stories? And to a huge degree, there is that question, what was missing from the field? And what was missing was people who looked like me.
Right.
And it wasn't passive, it was active in something. Edgar Rice Burroughs would write stories, in which the Edgar Rice Burroughs' stories were, the core of Tarzan was specifically racism. Specifically the idea that an English lord gentleman raised by apes is still a gentleman, and he made racism specific in one of his stories, The Jungle Tales of Tarzan, where he says white men have imagination, black men have little, animals have none. I mean, that was specifically, so you can't get away from it. But I needed those stories because I was trying to define myself as a man where I am in the universe. So as I once said to a group, that I sacrificed my melanin on the altar of my testosterone. I mean, I wanted to be a man more than I cared about being black.
I would add something. You brought something to Cornell and Niven they didn't have.
Yes.
From your perspective and your history. They did not have black orientation, any of that.
No.
So, but I don't know if that worked into the books.
Not that much. I mean, Jerry was by his own statement, politically to the right of Attila the Hun. So it was difficult to navigate that territory. One of the things I learned was how to argue with somebody smarter than you. Because Jerry was smarter than me. Just, Jerry's brain had a rocket attached to it. Larry's brain had a transporter attached to it. Whereas I could understand how Jerry would do stuff. It was just an ordinary brain with a lot more information working a lot faster. But Larry would dematerialize and materialize someplace else. He's like, I don't even know how you got there. So, taking their lessons and then writing my own stories demanded that I write from my own experience. So I'm then dealing with the fact that, my first book was a book with Larry. My second book was a book with Larry. My third book was a solo book. and I wrote a black character. I specifically wanted to create a black hero. That was Street Legal.
Street Legal.
Yeah, but the book company, Ace, put a white guy on the cover. He's very clearly described as being as dark as a Zulu. They put a white guy on the cover. And my poor editor called me up, and she's in tears. You know, poor Beth Meacham is her name. Very nice lady, not her fault. She said that they had done this. Susan Allison, who was the head editor, I don't have as good a feeling about her, because she kind of blew it off. She went up and said, well, it's one of the things that happened, it was the marketing department. And I talked to the marketing department, oh no, it's the art department. I talked to the art department. The art department said, well, it's the sales department. And the sales department said, well, the truck drivers who are going to put the books on the stands would think that this was Shaft in space. And so I realized at that point, I can either hate white people. Did I say that out loud?
You did.
I can either hate white people, or I consider that what's going on here is an example of how human beings think. That human beings feel protective of their tribe. Almost all human beings are tribal. They happen to have that power. Everybody wants to rule the world. Everybody wants to feel that the world reflects who they are in the mirror. So I'm just an unfortunate effect of this. What do I do with it? I can either use this and say, the world kicked my ass, or I can say, this is where we are right now. My dad, working with Nat King Cole, performed in hotels in Las Vegas where he could not stay. The world has gotten better than that. It's just not as good as I would like it to be. How much longer will it take? And I projected trend lines in my mind. I thought it might take 2 generations. It might take 2 generations. It might take another 30 to 40 years before the world is ready for the stories that I want to tell. Can I survive long enough to do that? And so I started a program of, I'm going to stay in this field, and I'm going to create my stories, and I'm going to do everything I can do, because I'm going to make it, first of all, I'm going to write stories that the kid who started this path would have wanted to read. And I'm going to create a career path so that other people coming in will have an easier time than I have. And Octavia Butler and I were the only black people working in the field. We had many conversations about this. We lived walking distance from each other. Octavia was a level above me as a writer. She was often not happy with what I wrote because she felt I was not living up to my potential. She would write, and they put green people on the covers of her books, but they wouldn't put black people. You know, so we had lots of interesting conversations about that. What do we feel about it? What are we going to do? I felt if I can stay in here and write the stories that I want, stories that would nurture the younger person I was, that no matter what happens, I've not been beat. And then I found out one day that there were scholars studying something called Afrofuturism, and I was considered to be an Afrofuturist. I didn't try to be one. I was just trying to write Stephen Barnes stories.
You just casually said that you've been walking with some for about 10 years.
She used to come over for dinner, and I'd go over her place, and then we'd just sit and we'd talk right in life. She was like my big sister.
That's what
Well,
I'm saying.
you go back to what was it, the 20s and 30s, and you've got Black No More, that early South
Yes.
War. And then you fast forward a little bit, and you got Chip Delaney, and yeah, he said he couldn't make a living, so he moved on. Incredibly elegant prose styles.
It's amazing.
And then you have Octavia Butler, and then there's you.
Yeah.
That's about it. And then we have
Tons of
sci-fi.
Can't even count it.
Yeah, but
You guys are the best.
you guys are the pioneers. Seriously, you were pioneers, which is really quite incredible when you think back.
Remember, pioneers get arrows in the butt. You know, I was just trying to be the best writer that I could be, and trying to survive, trying to take care of my family, and trying to survive in Hollywood. And I made mistakes. I betrayed that little creative spark inside me a couple of times, and it hurt. I mean, you can only sell yourself out so much.
Yeah.
You know, and what's even worse is if you try not to sell it out, and then one day you sell out and nobody's buying. You know, so that's even worse. But I remember one of my agents, I lost or walked away from one of my agents in Hollywood because I walked in there with my heart on my sleeve and I said, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in my career, but when I leave Hollywood, I want to leave with my sense of honor intact. And he looked at me and he said, you'll be the only one. And I realized at that moment, he and I did not understand each other at all. I need to find a new agent because I'm not going to sell my soul to do this. I'm going to do everything I can. You know, I will not sell out, but I will rip myself. You know, and I will stretch as far as I can, but I'm always going. Yeah, I'm kind of a hoe, but I enjoy my work. If I write an episode of Baywatch, and I wrote 4 episodes of Baywatch, people say, that's not science fiction. I said, you ever seen those silicon life forms running around on the beach? I found something in every episode that I can actually care about. And there's another story I can go into that I might tell another time, where the producers did eventually end up turning on me, but I got revenge. But that's another story.
We'll first, before, I think we can open up to a little bit of a Q&A. But before we do that, of course, we want to just really thank you for your words and candor.
And you said you came prepared with some comments, didn't you? You came prepared with some comments. Have you expressed what you wanted to express?
I came prepared with
You were almost going to write a talk to do this, but instead of that, you prepared some comments. I just wanted to be sure that Charles has had an opportunity to express himself.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I think it's probably a good idea if you want to move to that next phase.
But before we did that, let's thank these. So what we can do is, you know, the aisles can be your pathway, or if you so choose, you can just kind of raise. I can't see you because of the lights, so perhaps you might want to stand up, or okay, they just raise the house lights. So if you just, they just did, so I can see folks. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, please just raise your hand, and I will catch you. Not everybody at once.
Tumbleweed.
We got one. And you'll have to project, because I don't think we have a walking mic.
Did you write
Your
it
big
down?
voice.
Oh, it's over here.
Did you write it
There we
down?
go.
Okay. So they were writing out.
Oh, even better.
So if you have questions that you have written out, we've got some folks that you can pass them to the center.
The questions I'll get next time.
Oh, I see what people wrote on.
Yes.
All right, this is
All right.
good. This is good. Okay.
Chris has got one over
Yeah,
here.
I just get them all at once.
If you think of one, just slide one of them down. Do you want to?
All right, we start here. Okay, we ready? Okay. So I think this one is for both of you. And so this person says that they want to say that they appreciate that you both came out to speak with us this evening, and they love hearing your story. The question is there a book that you wrote that holds the most significance to you? If so, would you be okay with sharing your thoughts on the story? And then there's a little statement at the bottom. It says, on the day when life seems to be too much to handle, with all that you do. Okay, that's the second question. So let's go with the first question. Is there a particular book that you wrote that holds the most significance to you? And if so, would you share your thoughts on the story?
I can do that easy.
Okay.
Most significant book for me was my second novel called The Oxford Tale, which was rejected 2 dozen times. Nobody understood it. My own mentor, John Gardner, did not understand it and actually was afraid of the Buddhism that was in this novel, which is in the form of a slave narrative, philosophical novel in the form of a slave narrative, with access to Western and Eastern philosophy. And my editor didn't understand it from my first book, and, but that was critical. Had I not done that book, all the other books that I've done, 26, total 27, I would not have done it. I had to do that book. And once I did that book, I understood something about myself. I wrote the book to free myself of my passion in reading of Eastern philosophy and Buddhism from my teens. So I'm gonna write this book, and I'm gonna be free of it. Got to the end of the book, I realized, no, this is the beginning for me. So everything I've done has been, in a way, referenced back to Oxford Tale, which has a Bradbury connection, because there is a soul catcher, a slave hunter, and of course, Bradbury, who has tattoos. All the black people that he captures or kills, he gets tattoos on his body. That, where's that gonna come from, except the Illustrated Man, right? Which I read when I was younger. So that was a critical book for me, I'll say that much. Yeah, so that's
It would almost certainly be Lion's Blood.
which,
Lion's Blood. Which was my statement on race relations in America. Basically, it took me 6 years of research, and I basically created an alternate history that was an alternate America that was colonized by Islamic Africans, bringing, in this particular instance, Irish slaves here. And so the story deals with a young Irish boy named Aidan O'Dare, who was kidnapped by Vikings and sold to the Moors in Spain, in Andalus, the word for Spain, and brought to Balochistan, the United States, to the province of Nujabute, Texas, where he becomes the footboy slave of Kai ibn Jalaluddin ibn Rashid, who is a young Islamic nobleman. And the story covers their friendship for about 8 years, childhood to the beginnings of adulthood. And that, I don't know if I'll ever work that hard on a book again. I probably will not.
I remember what you said, you invited scholars to a party to ask them questions.
Yeah, I basically knew that I could spend 100 years researching and still not touch 1% of what I needed to know. So I did one of the smartest things I've ever done. It's probably one of the 10 smartest things I've done in my life. I invited a room full of the smartest people that I knew, and people came from hundreds of miles. They took an invitation, and we had a pizza party all day long. I fed them pizza and beer, and I had graph paper and butcher paper on the walls, and I passed out notebooks with the basic purposes of the world, the politics and the economics and so forth of this alternate universe. And I had a videographer following people around, and all day long we theorized about this world that I was trying to create. They showed me everything. They showed me so many things that I had not thought of. That by the end of that single day, I had enough research to begin the writing process. I had done 6 years of research before I did that part. So my attitude is you want to know enough to ask the right questions of experts. And if you can ask an expert the right question and they say, oh, yes, well, that's, and they go off, then you know enough to write your story.
This is a perfect example of what they call world building.
Yeah.
World building. And you went on to do a sequel or more than.
Well, I get to it. Lion's Blood is Zulubar.
Zulubar, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we have a good number of questions. I think we can.
Okay, let's
we got time.
I'll keep it short.
No, but we're good. I think everybody here is enjoying being able to hear.
Is this okay, guys?
You can't pry me out of the house, but once I'm out of the house, I really do want to serve. So this is your chance.
And then for anyone out there, if I misread anything, feel free to correct me. Given that we celebrate creativity, originality, and the process of fantasy, is naming things a reductive act?
You want to try that?
Is naming things?
Is naming things a reductive act?
Well, that's a big epistemological question.
How would you answer that?
To name something is a gift of nature. That's where we can talk about this. To name something is to limit it to whatever name you give it to it. There's a lot of ways you can take this, but naming can be extremely important. Gosh, I'll talk about this. I guess people who are Chinese have 4 or 5 different names. Birth name. I don't know what you feel about it.
It is reductive, but then again, all language is reductive. All language is a reification of something. All language is a symbol that is possible to mistake the meaning for the meal.
Right.
You know, if you're kind of stepping into my Korzybski for a second. But language is all we have. You know, we're communicating with people. And so we can go in the other room and get, what do you say? You know, and the salty thing, you know, and the thing that makes things taste sharper, you just use labels for things. The concept of taste, you use labels for. The concept of something that is bitter as opposed to sweet, as opposed to salty. All those things are labels. All words are nothing more than that. And what you do with language, I remember Chick Delaney in his book, The Jewel Hidden Jar, on writing, he talks about the fact that every word creates an impression. You know, the, okay, this is a definite article. The boy, okay, we get the noun here. The boy ran, the boy ran from. Oh, okay, now we're getting a sense of direction. That just as music is what happens between the notes, poetry is what happens between the words. As you hear a word, your brain does what's called a transderivational search for the meaning of that word. It's the journey that people go on between the words that creates the impression of art. It's like, you know, this note followed by that note. What happens in between there? The negative space is what an artist is manipulating.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the thing that we don't see. We see the words, but we don't see the space between the words. We see the trees, but we don't see the space between them. But it's the space between them. The trees punctuate that space to create a forest. So the labels that we use not necessarily to define things, but to guide consciousness. You know, think about this. Now think about this. Now think about this. What is the journey you go on between the words? That's the thing that the artist plays with that people do not see. And that is in some ways the most important thing. You only learn to get there by concentrating on the words, and then at some point you see the forest that you have created with the use of those words. It's one of the reasons why the first draft is so important. Just as far as I'm concerned, just vomit it out. Your first draft should be trash. Just get it out. What Bradbury referred to as running barefoot through the grass. Let your first draft be done from pure love. Then the rewrite process is where you're adjusting and playing with it. But just get that first draft out there. Don't try to make your first draft meaningful. Don't try to make it good. Don't try to, you know, make the work of the masters. Just write down the music that you're hearing and adjust it later.
And then rewrite and rewrite.
And rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. That's right. That's right.
Okay. And so you keep mentioning Charles Delaney.
Chip.
I don't
Samuel.
Samuel, I'm sorry. Okay. I don't know him enough to, you know, I know who he is. I read his work, but I don't know him. See, I don't, you know, you just mentioned I'll tell you brother, so I'm sure you know Chip Delaney. Anyway, I'm just not joking around here. So this question is about Mr. Delaney. Why is Delaney out of fashion? And the person mentioned that they love the reflection of light in water.
I would say it's simply because different styles of writing are going out of fashion. Chip Delaney came into the science fiction field in the 60s. It was called the New Wave. Where people, see, the first generation of science fiction were people who knew science and literature. You know, Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and so forth. The next generation of science fiction, Olaf Stapleton and people like that, knew the work of Wells. And the next generation after that, people like Robert Heinlein, they knew the Olaf Stapletons and so forth. They were doing the same thing. But by the time you get to the 60s, there was enough science fiction literature that it actually started coming back around. Instead, you know, that science fiction in the 30s and the 40s was justifiably mocked by literary establishment because it wasn't interested in literary qualities. It was interested in ideas, big ideas. You know,
Well, backing up to the first science fiction magazine, which was what?
Analog, Astounding.
No, it's even earlier than that.
Something planets or something.
The whole purpose of it was to teach young people science.
You talking about Hegel Gernsback?
Gernsback.
Gernsback, okay.
Yeah, the Gernsback. And that's where we get the term science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It was to teach and be didactic.
Right.
However, the earlier guys, if I don't mischaracterize them, would give us a science, but they really were good with certain things like characterization and the virtue to the soft sciences.
Yes.
That is to say, sociology and anthropology and blah, 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 blah. So and my colleague, Joan Russ, was part of that. I interviewed her and Chief Delaney because we did a special issue of the Seattle Review, which I was at fiction editor for 20 years, devoted to science fiction. So I interviewed them together in the office at the University of Washington. So I want to finish this off. What happened to Chief Delaney?
What happened to Chip Delaney is that in the new wave, people like him and Ted Sturgeon and Harlan Ellison were playing with language. They started playing with language and deconstructing the relationship between language and consciousness to create effects in their work. So they weren't telling, straightforward stories. Bradbury was an early person who was grounded in the pulps, but used that manipulation of negative space emotionally and artistically to create an effect. You put down one of his stories and say, this wasn't science fiction, but somehow, I want to look at the stars. Okay? Chip Delaney was in some ways, there were ways in which he was limited from writing about what he really wanted to write about, which was his sexuality and race. He could not write about those things at that time. So he would deconstruct language and concepts of race and consciousness and so forth. And he was friggin' brilliant. He was one of the very first, if not the first, black writer that John W. Campbell, who was the editor of Astounding, who became Analog, would publish, because Campbell was a racist. Right there, I know two people who have letters from him where he stated straight out, you can't write about an advanced African civilization because Africans aren't smart enough to create one. And he was one of the foundations of the field. So Chip Delaney had to hide who he was in order to write. So he hid in the world of the intellect. I will be so brilliant. When people think Chip Delaney, they will not think black, they will think brilliant. So he deliberately expressed his intellect so that people wouldn't notice his skin color. But and that's my interpretation, it's nothing he ever said directly to me about it, but that wears on you. How do you write stories for people and you feel in your heart, they don't want to know who I really am. If they acknowledge my intellect, they're making me an exception. If they were all like Chip Delaney, you wouldn't have a problem. That eventually can turn to ashes in your mouth and leave you asking questions of Ray Bradbury and Leo and Diane Dillon. And he, at some point, got out of it, but the field moved on. The 60s broke the box that Olaf Stapleton and Robert Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov created by asking us to, the 60s were a time of experimentation, drugs and love and peace and so forth and so on. The generation that came after the 60s took all of that for granted, and they began exploring science fiction with simultaneously a sense of the aesthetics that lead to literature. And by the 80s and the 90s, you actually had a body of science fiction where the best of the best had both mastered storytelling and the sciences and the capacity to create art. And so Chip Delaney was forgotten to a degree because we no longer needed what it is that he had brought to the field.
There was a recent issue of a magazine, national magazine, I can't remember what it was. Friend told me about it. I didn't read it. It was a long piece on Delaney. A long piece on Delaney.
A genuine genius.
Delaney
was a genuine genius. No question about it. He was one of Octavia's teachers. Okay? And, so to him, Octavia isn't Saint Octavia. She's a good writer, sometimes better than others. And he's for real. He really means that. And both of them are above my level. But what they were helped make the field what it is. They were foundation.
So we got 4 more. I think we can get through them. We will need to potentially move
A little quicker.
I'm getting the signs, but I don't want to disrupt the flow of what's happening here. So this person says, growing up reading comics, there was plenty of violence. But now graphic novels have the power to push out. I believe it's saying out peace. What are your thoughts on that? If you could.
Push out peace.
Push out
I don't even know what that means. If they mean that art is going to make the world more violent, I disagree with that wholly.
Okay.
I think that that violence comes from being, it's like the Billy Budd syndrome. The greater your vocabulary, the more ideas you can express in language, the less you have to hit people. There is an inverse relationship in prisons between the size of vocabulary and the violence of the crime. It's been noted many times by sociologists. So people who can play with ideas don't need this gap.
Okay, no, I'm satisfied.
Okay. Thank you, Elvis, for sharing your wisdom with your stories. And the question is, how do you nurture the connection between your adult self and your child self?
How do you nurture the relationship between your adult self and your child self? I'll give you a meditation that I've seen other people use. I don't know if anybody here meditates, but you can visualize this. Visualize yourself as your younger self. What if you had a time machine? And you could, this has been done in the movies, go back and talk to your younger self on a bad day, when he or she just, everything went wrong, getting beat up and so forth. Visualize yourself getting yourself that kid you were and holding that kid for, a breath or two. And telling the kid, it's pretty bad right now, but you don't know what's going to happen in the future. I do, it's going to be good.
See, that's perfect. In my system, our pedagogy, we teach, we have a podcast, the Life Writing Podcast, www.lifewritingpodcast.com, and we talk about a technique called the ancient child.
What?
The ancient child.
Okay.
It is a technique. And it's like, you imagine that at one end of a string is the child that you were. At the other end of the string is the elder you're going to be on your deathbed. Just you're going to die tomorrow. Beyond all ego, beyond any need to look good or any of that nonsense. And all you're trying to do is move with integrity between the dreams of childhood and the knowledge of what values are real that you will have on your deathbed, on the other side of the ego. And if you use a meditation like you just suggested, and you visualize the child self, you can ask the child what it wants you to do. And you can also visualize the child and the elder simultaneously, and then just sit back and listen to them talk together. And they will express everything you need to live your life with integrity.
I've got a variation that might be interesting, particularly if you have difficulties with your parents, with your mom or dad. Visualize them, and also maybe when they were young.
Yes.
And give them a hug.
Love it. I hadn't thought about that. I love that.
It sounded original to me.
That's multi-generational healing.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, no, I didn't invent that. It's a meditation that people do in the Buddhist tradition, but also I do one with my younger self every time I meditate. I give younger me a hug.
Yeah, I do that. I've never done that with my parents, though. And I'm going to do that within the next 24 hours. That's great. I love it. Thank you.
Last two, very quick, because it's a quick one. What are you reading now or watching?
I'm studying a time and energy management system. I'm not reading any, well, actually, no, I'm reading the Stephen King novel.
Okay.
And I'm studying a time and energy management system.
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
on the plane from Seattle, which left at 7 in the morning, so we had to be up at 4 in the morning, and I didn't get to bed, but nevertheless, from Seattle to Chicago, I read the essays in this, the Zen and the Art of Writing by Bradbury.
Okay.
And it was great.
Well, from Atlanta to Indianapolis, I read a story about one of the greatest living writers, a guy named Charles Nelson.
And I sent him a story that I just finished 2-3 days ago.
That's right.
Because it's about martial arts, so I said, I gotta show this to Steve. And you probably Steve read it on the plane, and you did that, thank you for
Yes, I
that.
did.
Thank you.
And one word, possibly one quick word, and we're gonna bring Dr. Hockman back up, but one quick word for any aspiring graphic novelists, writers. That was one of the questions, so I'm paraphrasing.
Okay, if we go with me for just a second, I've got something specific I like to say, the 6-step process that we teach in life writing. And we learned this from Ray Bradbury and studying other people like this. The first step is write at least one sentence a day, every day. Just make that commitment. Second step is write between 1 and 4 short stories every month. The third step is finish those stories and submit them. The fourth step is do not rewrite your stories except to editorial request. Once you finish them, don't rewrite them, go on to the next story. The fifth step is you read 10 times as much as you write. And the last step is repeat this process 100 times. We teach this to our students, and not a single person who's followed this advice has failed to publish by story 26.
Okay, well, I was a teacher at the University of Washington for 33 years, and I give my students assignments. But one of the things I got them to do that I found extremely valuable is keep a writer's workbook. Do not let your day go by in which you have a thought, a perception, an image that comes to you, and you don't put it down in your writer's workbook. You see an article that you like, clip it. These are extremely valuable. I have writer's workbooks that cover 3 shelves and go back to the early 70s. They're like memory aids. Keep a writer's workbook. Blank pages, put anything you want to on it. You know, like just descriptive passages. You see somebody that you run into and they're dressed in a distinctive and interesting way. Oh, they got an interesting tattoo. That goes, the world is yours to process through perception, and you put these scraps into your writer's workbook. And I assure you that they will be of use to you when you're. I look at my writer's workbooks. I've thought about reading something on every subject under the sun, literally since the early 70s. So it triggers my memory, and I see my younger self actually. Because what is it you're paying attention to in the 70s?
Yes.
Different than the 90s. It's almost like an archaeology of your own consciousness, what you're focusing on during a particular decade. I just filled up one, and I was telling one of my friends here, I'd like to go by the bookstore to see if I can get another blank book, because I have to have that during the course of the day. Put stuff into it. Is that it? Yeah. Writers come. If you want great examples of what they look like, look at Hawthorne, look at Chekhov, look at Sartre. That's not Sartre I'm thinking of. Some of the great writers. We have their workbooks. They have plot outlines for stories they've never written. They have observations of people. Study writers, and it's just for you, not for anybody else.
I'd like to make one quick comment. If you like the way we've been talking about writing here, you might want to come to a screenwriting workshop that my wife and I are doing. You can find out about it at www.hollywoodloophole.com. And what I would say is ignore the price on there. If you need a price, we just want good people. We don't care if you can afford the full price. For people who we know, just write us a letter and say you need a break on the price. We'll take whatever we got. What we want is people to come on September 23rd and really want to learn how to write and about screenwriting. www.hollywoodloophole.com.
All right. And folks, please make sure you go into the events for the festival 451. Tomorrow, the Can Theater will be screening Horror Noir with Tanetta Duke. Wonderful you have an opportunity for book signing in the back here.
An opportunity to get your books signed by Steve Barnes, Dr. Charles Johnson, Sharon Skeeter, and Tanetta Reed. There are 4 tables up here at the front. Please put on your note cards what you would like them to write in your book. To my left, the aisle on the far left, your right, we're going to line up over here. We're going to pull the tables forward, and we're going to get your book signed. If you need to purchase a book, in order to have it signed, the book table is still up in the foyer. To the back there where I'm pointing. And thank you all for a wonderful night. Thank you for such a stimulating discussion, and we love you. Thank you.